Hello everyone, I'm Keith Platfoot with Kviation, and today we're going to look at logging a second flight in Smart Logbook. So in our first video, we logged a flight from KCMH, Columbus, Ohio, to KATL, Atlanta, Georgia. Now today we're going to log another flight from KATL down to KMCO, Orlando International. And we're going to look at a few additional options and features for logging flights. So we can see here on our flight list, we have that first flight we logged appearing. As before, let's tap plus and begin logging another flight. Now we see the copy from previous bar. Let's tap that and we can see what that does here. So we can see that that has populated a couple of additional fields in our flight based on the values that we logged in our first flight. We have the flight number field, we have the aircraft, and we have our departure airport set to the arrival airport of our previous flight. Now, of course, we can change any of these if we like. We could just tap in any of these fields and give it a different value. For example, we can change our flight number to 28904. Or, for example, if we wanted to change to a different aircraft, say that we took a different plane down to Orlando, we can tap that field and we can choose other aircraft. And let's go ahead and add another Boeing 737 here with the tail number 400 Whiskey November. Now this is another Boeing 737, so we can just tap that existing model there and then tap done to return to the flight. Moving down to route, as I said, we already have our departure set based on the previous flight. So all we have to do is tap 2 to set our arrival airport. And you can see here that we do have our previous airports, KATL and KCMH, showing up automatically because we have recently flown to those airports. We also now have KMCO, Orlando, being listed as our current airport based on our location. And so that shows up at the top. So all we have to do is just tap that row, and we now have that populated as our flight's arrival airport. We can move down now to our times, and this flight, we're going to say actually was later in the day. It began at 8:45 local, and that was actually the next day in Zulu time, which is how we're going to log our times. So let's enter that as 0045, set that. And we arrived in Orlando at 10:20 p.m., which was actually 220 Zulu. So we have that. So we can see as before that setting these times has automatically set our total and our pilot and command time for us. So this was an hour, 35-minute flight. You'll also notice that we have another duration type added automatically, and this is the night duration down here at 1 hour and 22 minutes. Now, Smart Logbook was able to determine this based on the departure and arrival airport locations and times. And it's automatically determined that that flight included 1 hour and 22 minutes of nighttime. Now it does this based on, by default, the FAA rules, but there are other settings if you'd like to use, for example, the UK definition of night. You can go in settings and change that. Now we also have from our previous flight, we have this instrument duration type, and you can see that it's set to 0. Now let's say that on this flight, we don't actually need to log any instrument time. So we can do one of two things. We can either leave the duration type here in the flight and just leave its value at 0, or if we like, we can just tap the X and we can remove that duration field from the flight entirely. So let's move down to takeoff and landings. Now this flight, as we said, did arrive in Orlando at night, so we're going to log 1 day takeoff and 1 night landing. We're going to skip approaches on this one. That takes us down to crew members, and you can see that we automatically have our first officer there, John Smith, from our first flight. And this happened because when we opened the flight editor, we tapped that copy from previous. So that also included our previous crew members. Now, of course, if we wanted to change, if we had a different first officer, we could easily tap that and we could select or add a different crew member for that second leg. But we'll go ahead and keep John Smith as the first officer for now. And let's take a look at some of these options here at the bottom. So in addition to logging some of these other fields, you can also add a photo to your flight. And that photo is saved with your flight, synced with your logbook. So let's give that a try. We tap Add Photo, and we have two options. We can take a photo with the camera, or we can choose a photo that we've already taken. So let's choose the second option here. And you can see that pops open a photo picker. And let's add this photo that we took at the gate at Atlanta of this other airliner. So we choose that photo, and you can see that we now have that photo added here to our flight. We can tap the photo, open it up full screen. We can admire the kind of cool retro livery of this American Airlines airplane that was there at the gate. And we can tap back to return to the flight. And then lastly, let's take a look at this Add and Configure Fields option here at the bottom. So you've seen in this video and the previous one that Smart Logbook includes most of the common fields you would need when logging flights. But you can also add additional fields. So let's tap this and we can see some of those. So here you can see the full list of built-in flight fields that Smart Logbook supports. And you can see that some of these are currently turned off. But if we wanted to, for example, log duty times, we could turn that field on. If we were, say, a glider pilot, we might want to turn on tows and launches fields. Or if we're a commercial pilot, maybe we want to track our number of passengers, so we can turn that field on. I also want to point out at the bottom that if you need to log something that is not already supported by Smart Logbook, the app also lets you add your own custom fields. And we'll take a look at that in a different video, but you can see the button at the bottom where you can do that. For now, we're going to return to our flight with that passengers field enabled. So let's scroll back to the bottom, and you can see that we now have a passengers field. So we can tap into that field, and let's say this flight had 120 passengers. And there we go. So I think that's all we need to log for this flight. So we just need to tap Done and return to the flight list. And there it is. We now have that second leg, KATL to KMCO, and that's showing up above our first flight because the flights are listed newest to oldest in Smart Logbook. And that's it. So I hope this showed you a few more things about logging flights in Smart Logbook. If you have any questions, as always, you can contact us at feedback@thesmartlogbook.com. Thanks.